Well, 3 minutes past. I think we're start if that's okay. So thanks again, everybody, for coming along. We've got some two interesting discussions. First of all, if we could start with Mahmoud, if you don't mind, is that okay?
Yep, that's fine.
So it's
I'm
going to be talking
gonna,
about debugging through the Archie's command line interface.
yes, so I'm gonna share my screen. I'm gonna be switching between sharing multiple things, so hopefully that would work. If people can verify that they can see the black, yeah, okay, that looks like all right. Okay, so this is gonna be slightly technical, as we're gonna talk about code quite a bit, but I'm gonna try as much as possible to keep it relevant to everyone. I want to begin by thanking the Ashes and Coffee Group, who, without their involvement in this and their encouragement, none of this would have happened. And specifically, of course, the projects I work for, Cal and MISM. So I'm going to begin with a hypothetical day of a programmer. We write some code and it runs. Great. The problem is the answer is wrong. Happens quite often. Happens in Ashes as well, being like any big package uh, has a lot of code. And the solution usually is that we'd add a few prints. So we'd run the code with a few prints. The usual thing is that we, add a couple of prints there, run the program. Not quite sure what's happening. Go again, add some more prints, run the program, and so on and so forth. And like we end up being in a situation a bit like this. Um, so I'd like to imagine a reality where there is a magical tool that would allow us to stop the code while it's running and look at certain values and try to understand what is happening. Or maybe we can step through the code one line at a time. And of course, foreshadowing and all, I'm here to tell you that such tool does exist, and it's called a debugger. And Python has an implementation of these debuggers. Um, there are multiple iterations of how this came about in Python. Since version 3.7, you can add a breakpoint in any part of the code, and then you would stop the code. You'd be able to go through it one line at a time and understand what's happening. And that's incredibly useful when you're trying to work, as I said, with a large code base that might be a bit complicated or more complicated than a human can understand in the short amount of time that they can look at maybe a couple of functions. Right. So these breakpoints or these debuggers integrate with the majority of the IDEs that we work with. So if you work with, I don't know, VS Code or anything else, most likely there is a plugin that would work with this. Even people who work with Vim, there are pluggers plugins that add to debuggers to this. Right. So this is all for the uh, introduction. Now let's do a demo. So I'm going to stop sharing and then share again, but a different screen this time. Uh, Also, if people have questions while I am sharing or like we're looking at different parts of this presentation, please do speak because I'm not going to be able to see you. Uh, so maybe one of the moderators could manage this, but I wouldn't be able to see you. Okay, so let's begin with this. Is this readable for people? Should I increase the font size a little bit, maybe? Yeah. Okay. Okay. I hear nothing, but I'm expecting that that's the answer. Right. So what are we looking at here? What we're looking at is a connection through my VS Code to a server running an Arches instance. This Arches instance is version 8, and I have on the side here, I have a virtual environment called env, which is somewhere here. Right. Yeah, that's the virtual environment, and my instance is called demo. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to upload some data using the Arches CLI, using CSVs, and we're going to see something strange in this data. So what I want to first do is I want to show you the data, and I want to show you the resource model that we're interacting with. The resource model, people who are familiar with this types of tools would know that this is a mapping file here that we're looking at. And this mapping file has two nodes. One is called a name, and the other one is called a type. So it doesn't get simpler than this. Only two nodes in the resource model. And then the data, hopefully named a good data and bad data, are just one resource each. So we have resource one with the type A. So we have the resource ID, the name, and the type. And in the bad data, we have slightly different thing. We have the resource ID, name, type, and then it's first and second. What I want you to focus on is that the names of the columns here, resource ID and name and type, are exactly the same. This is what you'd expect in uploading data using the CSV. But of course, there is a tiny problem. So again, I'm gonna, probably it'll be easier if I share the entire screen just so we don't jump back and forth between sharing. Okay, I'll try this. Hopefully nothing embarrassing comes up. Okay, so we have here on the right-hand side our SSH connection to the server, and we're gonna try to upload the data. Now, the way that you do this is you use the CLI. You would type something along the lines of this. So Python manage package, import the business data, give it the location of your data, and then also give it the location of your mapping file, overwrite if you want to overwrite, or append, or the other options that exist in the CLI. This is all normal. And I'm going to try to push the data, and it'll take a couple of seconds, and it would say, yes, correct. The resources have been saved. It's one resource. Right, great. Now I'm going to try the other piece of data, and you would notice here that instead of good data, I have now the bad data. I'm going to push it in, and it's going to take a second, and it's going to say errors. The resource ID file, the column is not there. What happened? We have just looked at the data, and we can see both the good and the bad data, they are exactly the same. But for some reason, Arches is able to read one of the data files and not able to read the other data file. If people have guesses, please say them. It's welcomed. People who know the answer, because they have seen the demo before, please don't reveal the secrets. But people who want to guess, please go ahead and do so. Right, so we'll give you a couple of seconds. No one? Okay, no one wants to reveal, spill the beans. Right, so what I'm gonna try to do here, we're in a typical situation where we have a large piece of code and we are putting an input to the piece of code, an output comes out, and it is not what we expect. Now, if you're following the print ethos, you would maybe try to read the Arch's code base, add some prints somewhere where you think strategically would reveal the secrets, and try again and again and again. But I want to do something different today. What I want to do is I want to use a debugger. And the debugger, as we maybe have seen a little bit, would stop the running of the code. So a normal expectation would be that we would put the debugger connected to the Arches server, which we run as in a development server. And that is reasonable, but the problem with doing this is that the process that we will attach to is the Django process that runs the server itself, which is slightly different from the CLI. So the way that Arches is designed, which is very similar to a lot of other packages that use Django, is that it has a way to interact with the server using a separate thread or a separate process, which running the CLI. So this is all to say that we run the development server as normal. I mean, I wouldn't want you to do this in a production, wouldn't recommend debugging in production. Is not great, leads to very angry PIs. But if you are interested in doing debugging, I would recommend running a development server, which you would do. So we have here on the side. No, okay, it's not happy with me, but okay, nice. So what we have here is in our uh, same SSH session, we're running a development server on the background, and this development server is the one that we're going to interact with now. So we're going to run our debugger on the CLI command itself. So how do we do this? Using VS Code, the easiest way to do it is that you need to add from the root folder that you're opening. So because this is a session opened on a server, I choose where my root connection is, and I chose my root connections to be within the Ubuntu home. Again, this is very bad practice, but just for the purpose of the demo. And I would create a folder, I would call it .vscode, which is directed to VS Code IDE itself. If you're working with Vim, if you're working with Eclipse, anything else, it will be a bit different, but generally around the same idea. And in that file, in that folder, I will add a file called launch.json. And that file here would contain all my magical spills to interact with the CLI. So what I am doing is essentially I'm telling VS Code to use the environment that I have created, and I am telling it to run the Python or like the manage.py program here being the entry point of the CLI. And then I'm giving it a few of the commands or a few of the arguments that need to go with the manage.py. This is not a typical way to do debugging, but it is sort of the way that we arrive to that is more stable than passing the commands through. There are other ways that you can connect to the debugger, but I'm choosing this one specifically because it's easier to share files between different people who work on the same project and arrive at the same solution. You would see here all the normal arguments that you would see when you're uploading data. So imagine I'm typing the command in the terminal. I'm saying Python manage.py packages, and then import business data. I'm given the location of the file, the data file. I'm given the location of the mapping file, and I'm choosing to overwrite. And then I want to run this command. So in VS Code, there is a debugging window here, or debugging tab that you can connect to, and you can start the debugging. Now, you would see also at the bottom some of the breakpoints that I have added, and breakpoints here that being the location where I want the code to stop. So I'm gonna untake a few here. We're gonna come back to them, but I sort of prepared them just to make it a little bit easier for me to run. Now I'm gonna run the debugging, and we should expect to see similar results to what we have seen in the command line. So I'm gonna run the debugger. And what it will do is it will take all this command, compile it together, and run it. And then because I already had some breaking points added, it stops at import business data. But I don't want it to do this now, so I'm going to continue running. And at the end, once it finishes running, it should show me similar results to what we have seen in the command line before. Okay, it's not doing what I'm expecting it to do, which is sort of typical in demo. Okay, nice. Now it's doing what I'm expecting to do. So now it's showing me the same error that it has shown before, which is that the resource ID doesn't exist. So I verify here that the same command that I'm running in the terminal is the command that is running through the debugger. But we haven't learned anything new. What we want to learn now is where does this error occur and how can we fix it? So the thing that you want to do is that you want to come to your code. So the Arches code that we are working with in this instance would live normally within the environment that you're running rather than within your project. Because this CLI is part of the package Arches rather than part of your particular project, then it lives within the package, the Arches package itself, which usually lives within your environment, lib, and then the name of like the Python version that you have, side packages. You could have within here lib 64 or 46, depending on the architecture of your computer that you're running, but it's effectively the same. Is going to be one or the other based on the as I said, the architecture of your program and the architecture, sorry, of your computer and the version of Python you installed. But basically, what we're looking for is where is the entry point of this CLI and where did it stop? How can we find the error that we are seeing? One way to do this is to try to see the error, because that error here is a string of text that is written within the Python code itself. So we're going to try to find this string of text within the Python code, and it's very easy because if I just copy this tiny bit, which is like please add, or like a column with the unique identifier, I can copy this piece of code here, this piece of text, and I can search in the entirety of the environment that I have, and I can immediately see that there is in here, in this file called csv file.py, inside Arches, the warning or the error that I have seen. And if you read Python code, you would see that it is within a try and except statement, which tells me that most likely something is being tried in here, some piece of code is being tested if it's going to be running or is going to fail. And if it fails, it will go to this piece of code to run as like print there. So my guess would be that within this try is some information that I would be able to use to learn where the problem is. Now, just the thing that I would want to be very careful about is, as I said, there is two packages. There is lib64 and just lib, and this depends on the architecture of yeah, as I said already. So I know for my case that it should be in 64. For your particular installation, it might be different. So just keep that in mind. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a breaking point. The way that I put a breaking point is that I go to this sidebar, which they call it GLHER, and I would put a red dot here just by adding a click. Once you add a breaking point, the debugger should stop at the breaking point and allows you to do a few things. We will see now. But just to say also, these breaking points can be conditional. You can specify if you want a specific condition to be checked for before you run before the breaking point is activated. So I'm going to add it somewhere here around this with statement, and I'm going to go back to the debugger and run it again. And hopefully this time it will stop. Might stop first at the business. Yeah, it does. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue, which means go to the next breaking point and then continue again. And it should go. No. Oh, yes. Okay. So now it goes to the breaking point that I was aiming for. Now, what I have done is that I stopped the code from running. It doesn't continue to run all the lines. It will run now at my choice. So I can run one line at a time if I want. I can step into, as in like if I have a function, I can go inside that function, or I can go from the smaller function to the larger function, from the more specific to the great to the general function. And more importantly, there is a console that allows me to inspect different values inside the code at the moment. So one of the things I would do is that I would try to look at this try statement here. And what I see is that what it's doing is that it's passing business data, it's passing the first instance of business data to a function called a process resource ID. So I want to see what's inside this business data. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type business data in the debug console here, and I'm going to print it out. And immediately I can see that resource ID is prefixed with this strange piece of text that I don't know where it came from. But essentially, we found the problem because what Arches is checking for is the existence of exactly resource ID, but we have something prefixed with our resource ID that our text editor is unable to see. Now, this is a problem with encoding, but it is a completely different problem and maybe a conversation for another time. I will stop the presentation at here. This was very condensed, so we're very happy to elaborate on this in details. If you'd like to come to our Arches and Coffee at some point, we can talk a little bit more about it. And now I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm happy to take questions if people want to ask.
Well, thank you very much for that. Are there any questions? I've got, I mean, whilst people are thinking, I mean, I got some of your presentation. I mean, bits of it, I must admit, I was hanging on by my fingernails. Um, but I was going to ask, because this is on a lot of people's minds, obviously, at the moment. Have you thought of any way of introducing AI to this, to helping you with the debugging, or is that something that could be done, do you think?
Okay, so the short answer to this is that, yeah, of course you can add, like you can sprinkle AI on top of
Mm,
anything. But the issue with AI is that it's inherently probabilistic. And one of the things about the most of the debugging, unless you're doing race conditions, which is, thankfully we're not dealing with, it is deterministic, meaning that the code that I'm running, I expect to execute exactly the same time every single time.
mm,
So I should expect the same results. And um, I guess like when you say AI here, what you mean most likely is large language models, so LLMs, similar to what you see in the ChatGPTs and the Cursor and all of that. And one of the most useful things that they would be possibly able to do is maybe summarize parts of the code or try to sort of simulate running a piece of input data into uh, some of the code. But my issue with running AI here is that, as I said, it's probabilistic. You don't really know if the result you're getting is true, right? It will tell you something and it will sound very convincing. And and I've been in this situation many times. If my knowledge is up to a point where I sort of can ish understand what he's talking about, but I don't really know for sure, I might be convinced. And I'd be, up for a very bad surprise at the end. So even though that I think it would, yes, it would help in the sense of it helps you to understand the code. So like if I have Arches, I can release an LLM on Arches and say, summarize these functions to me, tell me like what is connected to what and so on. But I would still need to understand the code and I would still
mm.
need to verify what it's telling me. Because it is not, if the situation that you're thinking of is replacement of a debugger by an LLM, that is gonna lead to some very, very bad results.
Yes, I'm very wary of AI. I think in some respects it can be useful, but there's a point where I just wouldn't, trust it to. Well, I just wouldn't trust it at all. No, thank you. I just curious. That's all.
Of course.
Has anybody else got any questions? No. Well, if anybody thinks of anything, obviously please pop it into the chat. But thank you so much again. That was an interesting presentation. It's nice to get a view from the other side, as it were. So thank you so much for that.
Thank
Right.
you.
Our next presentation is by Samuel, or from Samuel, who's going to be giving us a bit of an update on the QGIS plugin. So if you're ready, Samuel, please take it away.
I am indeed. Thanks, Stuart. So hopefully everyone can see that. I can't see you though. So
Yep.
Sorry, we can see that.
yeah, there we go. I'm going to turn my video off just to preserve internet connection. Okay, hello everyone. So I'm Samuel. I work for Knowledge Integration. I'm the head of Arches at Cairn. We're a Arches service provider. Have been so since 2017. So yeah, we've nearly been involved in Arches for 10 years. And we're based in Sheffield in the UK. And I'm going to talk to you about the Arches QGIS plugin, which we're very happy that released in January now. So it's March now, so it's scary how time is going on. But yeah, so we're really happy about the QGIS plugin and where it is finally to have it out there. I've spoken about the QGIS plugin at a few developer conferences, and I think maybe this UK interest group or before when it was a user group. But yeah, really excited that it's out there, and hopefully people are using it. And if anyone's, I'll reiterate this at the end, but if anyone's got feedback, then please don't hesitate. Yeah, shout it to me. So I'm going to start off with this slide that Phil showed in his Lingo presentation last time. I've stolen it just to highlight the QGIS plugin mentioning on this as a feature of Arches. So Arches has spatial data, GIS features and functionalities from within it. And I'm glad that both the QGIS plugin and the ArcGIS Pro plugin are now included on there. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So we'll take a step back. I'm sure many people in this room know what a GIS is, but if you don't, that's fine. I thought let's find out what Esri's formal definition of what a GIS is. So it's a geographic information system, and essentially what it does is it allows you to connect data to a map. You can use it for data management, spatial analysis, using mapping and visualization. But yes, essentially you can store spatial data with some metadata stored in an attribute table. And as this says, it helps users understand patterns, relationships, and geographical context. So GIS software, there are quite a few out there. I was going to do a comparison here between QGIS and ArcGIS Pro, which I have done before. But there are many articles out there online with 50 or so comparisons, and I think that would probably give you a better example if you were interested in learning about the two of them. I also won't state my preference, but it is clear that I'm doing an entire presentation on QGIS, so that probably speaks for itself. But basically, these two software allow you to edit, analyze, visualize spatial data. You can create raster layers, so that could be images, satellite imagery, base maps, that sort of thing. You can use vectors, so your standard points, polygons, lines, multi-polygons, that sort of thing. And then also mesh layers if you're interested in maybe doing 3D mapping. Both support industry standard formats, things like shapefiles, geo packages, database connections, the whole lot, and web services. So WMS, WMTS, all of those nice ones. But you might be thinking, well, hold on, that first slide said that Arches has GIS and spatial functionality, so why might we need a GIS? Well, Arches does contain GIS tooling and all the core functionality that you might need. And some organizations, this is fine. You don't need a GIS. You don't even need to worry about it because Arches contains everything that you need it to. That's visualizing the data. So we've got the Arches search map that loads when you want to do a search. You can view all of your polygons and all of your layers. So whether it's a monument layer here or application area or consultation, and then you can query that data, whether it's by doing just a map search, drawing a polygon of an area to see what returns. You can couple that with an advanced search in Arches, so you could get every church within this area. Or you could, if you were using Arches for HRs, perhaps you could use the BNG search, so you can enter a national grid reference, have a buffer around it, and then also couple that with your advanced query search. And then also you can have historical mapping within Arches. So you've got overlays. You can integrate something like PG feature serve, PG tile serve, or make your own Django views if you want for grabbing some Arches data, pulling it out into a new view, and maybe you've got specific types of churches or something. Or you can use a service such as GeoServer and actually have your own raster imagery on top of the base map. And then you can sort of search and visualize using that. So Arches isn't a GIS application. It's not intending to be, but it can integrate with GIS if need be, and it can hold its own. So why might one want to use a GIS? Well, there's probably a few reasons, and I've thought of three here, but there's probably millions. And it's really up to personal preference and sort of organization. Perhaps your legacy system used a GIS, or you've always used a GIS within the workflows that you have as an organization, and you want to retain that. So it could link into the second option. Maybe you've got the GIS, your QGIS instance is the source of truth for your spatial data. And perhaps it's not just you as maybe an HCR officer or whoever you might be using Arches. It's not just you interested in the GIS data. You've also got information coming from other, I don't know, planning bodies or other organizations, individuals within your organization supplying you with data. So it acts as a single playing ground for everyone. And also it kind of works offline. So Arches is obviously a web-based platform, but you could use a GIS out in the field or when you're away researching and then deal with uploading to Arches afterwards. That's also entirely possible. So some of you might know that there exists a plugin for Arches for Esri's ArcGIS Pro, and this really was the inspiration for the QGIS plugin. So it was developed by both Historic England and Farallon quite a few years ago now. But essentially what it allows users to do is use your ArcGIS Pro layers and your geometries and whatever you have there and push them up to Arches as either new resources or editing existing ones. And when this was released, and maybe even prior, there was quite a demand for a QGIS version of being able to integrate with Arches. And some might question why. Well, one thing I didn't mention that is the main difference between QGIS and ArcGIS Pro is their availability and sort of the licensing. Now, QGIS is open source, it's free. Both Arches and QGIS sort of share similar GPL licensing. ArcGIS Pro is a proprietary piece of software. It's closed source, and if you want to use it, you have to get a license for it. The other interesting thing about QGIS and Arches is both are written in Python. Now, while this actually doesn't really mean too much, it does lower the barrier to entry if maybe your Arches developers are interested in QGIS because the language barrier is non-existent. You can understand it and you can start, getting your hands dirty if you want. And both QGIS and Arches have community-driven development. So you can go to either and request a new feature or issue a bug report, that sort of thing. So like I said, the QGIS plugin was released on the 13th of January this year. It shares the same functionality as the Esri one, but for QGIS. Now, that's likely not always going to be the case, as I've got a roadmap at the very end to show you sort of what we've got planned for the future. But right now, both do the same bits of functionality in the sense that you can authenticate with Arches, you can create resources, edit resources, etc. And I'll show you that in a second. And just for developers who might be interested in a bit of the software side of it, I'll be very quick, don't worry. The source code is available on GitHub. It's under the Arches project organization. You can see it here. If you want, you can raise a pull request. You can go raise an issue. Like I said, it's written in Python. The front end of QGIS and the QGIS plugin is it is written in a framework called PyQt. That's a framework. The Qt framework is a framework for C++, but it's just a Python binding for it. And if you want to get involved in UI development, then there are instructions within the documentation, but you can use a program called Qt Creator, and you can essentially view the front end as sort of dialogues, boxes, widgets, that sort of thing. So how to install the plugin and how to get started with it. So there are some pre-requirements. First is that you need Arches running. It needs to be accessible via a public domain IP address, not necessarily public. Obviously, if you're on your own network, that's fine, but it needs to be accessible. Then you need to register what's called an OAuth application. OAuth is just the way that Arches can authenticate with external APIs and other software that might use the APIs. Once you've created an OAuth application, you then copy what's called a client ID into your settings.py file. That might sound confusing, but the Arches documentation is very good on this bit. So any confusion, hopefully the Arches documentation will sort you out there. And once you've registered the OAuth app, all you now need is a user, an Arches user, preferably with permissions, because the Arches QGIS plugin reflects the permissions that your Arches user has. So if maybe you're a volunteer who doesn't actually have access to create brand new resources, the plugin is not going to let you in. So you need to have the relevant permissions. And then optionally, if you are interested in editing existing resources rather than just pushing up new ones, you'll probably need an Arches resource layer. And this can be served by, again, PG feature serve, tile serve, any Postgres, or simply just the spatial views functionality that exists within core Arches. And that's what I will be using in today's sort of screenshots about how it can be used. So you've done your requirements, you've got Arches up and running. So how to actually install the plugin? The easiest way is to just do it from within QGIS. And it's simple, it's easy. You just need to go to the plugins bar at the very top, hit the manage and install plugins option, and this will open up your plugins dialog where you can see everything you've got installed and all plugins that exist in the world. So once you're there, you can search Arches or Arches project and you can see it pop up. It'll show you some information, the description, it'll show you the number of downloads and the ratings it's got, as well as the latest version, so you can make sure you're up to date. You can then hit install plugin, or if you've already installed it, you can uninstall it or reinstall it. And then once it's there, you can access it via the plugins drop down again. You'll see Arches project, and then you can either click that, or there's the Arches icon also on the toolbar, which you can just click to get started. The second option is downloading it from the online QGIS plugins repository. So every plugin that's made is uploaded to this plugins repo website, and the Arches project plugin is no different. So I've got the URL there, also the one for the Arches project, but you could also just search it. I'm sure it would come up via Google. And what you see here is essentially the same information. You can download latest, which will download as you would expect, the latest version, the latest stable, non-experimental version. And that'll download a zip, which you then need to find and drop into your QGIS installation path. This also shows some details about who created it, where the homepage is, the versions, that sort of thing. And you can also see version history. You can install previous versions. You can see the 3 experimental plugin versions that we released, if you were interested in looking at them. Also, for future versions, we may have a new experimental version before it becomes actually released. So if you were interested in being on sort of the cutting edge version rather than the LTS version, you could do that as well. And then once you click the version itself, again, you can download it here, and you can also see the change log. So for the release one, we've just done an overview of the core functionality. But if there's a patch release, this will include what it fixes, or if it's a minor release, it'll include the new features, maybe some breaking changes, that sort of thing. And you can see the QGIS version that it supports, whether it needs any external dependencies, that sort of thing. And finally, the third method is cloning from GitHub. This is primarily for developers. I wouldn't recommend anyone do this if they were interested in deploying the plugin for production. It's really for people who want to tinker around or maybe contribute to development. So as I mentioned, the GitHub page is on Arch's project. You can see it here if you just want to have a look at the code, but it's linked to on the website as well. And yes, if you want to develop it, this is the way I would suggest. Now, installation can also be a bit tricky, especially the GitHub one. There are a few steps. I would suggest looking at the GitHub README. I've got a video later of just sort of scrolling through it, but we've been very thorough with this README because it's kind of the documentation at the moment, not just developer and installation docs, but also user docs. So I'd highly recommend that. So you've installed the plugin. Now what? Well, you can start playing with it. So if you hit the button, you'll see that it opens up the Arches project, the QGIS plugin dialog. This is what it looks like. You'll see that it's a separate interface to QGIS, so it's not attached to sort of the interface yet. And we've got the sign-in page that you're met with, along with 5 tab options. So I'll quickly go through those, but what I will show as well is that we have 2 themes active on the plugin. So you've got the Arches theme that is what it boots up with, and this is to mimic Arches in the sense that maybe if you're very, very familiar with Arches and then you go to the plugin, you feel at home. But also, if you are more familiar with QGIS and you open this up and you see Arches and then you become a bit confused, then this is the theme for you. So we've got the two side by side. We've got the sign-in interface. The next one is the create resources interface, where everything's inactive at the moment because we've not logged in, hence why the buttons and the drop downs are slightly grey. But this is where we can select our Arches resource and our geometry, so we want to push up to Arches for brand new resources. We've then got edit resourcing, or editing resources, sorry, where you register resources to edit, and then you can tinker around with them once you've registered them as an official Arches resource. We've got the activity log. This is a page where you can see every operation that's happened in the current QGIS session. And then lastly, we've got the settings, which is fairly bare bone at the moment. It's just the theme tick box, but I'm sure it'll grow as the project grows. So I've got a few screenshots here to sort of show how it might work in practice. For this sort of example, I've used Arches for HERs. I've used some Sheffield-based buildings and maybe some operations that one might do. So I'm logging in to my local instance. As you can see, it's just a Arches running on my laptop here. And you don't have to type in your server every single time. So it's nice. It remembers your server URL as well as your username. So you don't have to go type it in every single time. And once you've logged in, you're met with an Arches sort of loading wheel. It connects to your Arches, it fetches the graphs, it fetches permissions, and then you're in. You can see that this is sort of the user profile page where you've got a picture of a person with your name showing you which server you're connected to, and you've got a refresh model. You've got a button for refreshing models and logging out. Refreshing models and nodes, that button just does what it says in the tin, really. If you're working on Arches at the same time as the GIS, and maybe you created a brand new model whilst logged in, your QGIS instance won't know about it. So pressing that button will just refresh everything that QGIS plugin knows about your Arches instance. And that's the same for if you've maybe edited a resource model, made a new node. So we go to create resource. In this example, want to create a new monument. So I'm going to hit the drop down and it'll see all of our resource models that have a GeoJSON feature collection node within them. So you'll see that person isn't within this list because same with organization, it doesn't have a geometry node. So we've selected monument, and here in my QGIS instance, I've drawn the Sheffield Millennium Gallery. This is definitely not the reason that it's the venue for our Sheffield the Arches Developer Conference being hosted in Sheffield later this year. Yes, definitely not intentional. But yeah, I've drawn the Millennium Gallery because I want to send this up to my local Arches instance. So I select it through QGIS. and the plugin now knows that it's one feature has been selected. This has been selected. So all I need to do is hit create resource, and a pop-up will pop up telling me, are you sure you want to create this? You can cancel or you can create. It'll tell you that you've selected one polygon. And if you hit create, it'll tell you a nice success message, and it'll give you the URL, which you then can click, and it'll take you to Arches. And what you can see is just a blank resource loaded with that geometry that you've just pushed to Arches. It's got no name, so you can just go and create it. You can start adding descriptions, designations, construction phases, the whole lot. So the next thing I want to do is I want to edit an existing resource. So we have on this instance Sheffield Cathedral. Now, this resource exists in my Arches instance. You can see it here, and you can see in the bottom right that that's what Sheffield Cathedral actually looks like. But this resource maybe was created a while ago, or maybe just incomplete, because there's a bit at the back of the Sheffield Cathedral that was built in, I think, the 80s, called the Archer project. And this is missing from our resource in the geometry. So I want to add this and push it up to Arches through the QGIS plugin and through QGIS. So I've selected my Sheffield Cathedral model, Sheffield Cathedral geometry. I'm registering it as a new resource. It's been recognized. The plugin shows us a table of information that's provided in the layer. So in the spatial view, it's showing me the functional type, the description, period, any designation information. And this shows that it has recognized it as an Arches resource because it's got the Arches resource instance ID, it's got tile ID, it's got nodes, etc. So I then want to select my geometry to upload to Arches. So I've activated my Sheffield polygons layer on the left, and I've selected the additional bit to the cathedral. It's noticed it, it said one feature is selected, and now I hit the add geometry button, which questions me again, am I sure I want to add it? I say yes, and it gives me a nice, well done, you've successfully done this operation. And we go to the Arches resource, and we can see it's there. So I can now continue editing, and then this polygon will show in my QGIS instance. And lastly, the final operation that I want to do before I'm finished with the day is I want to fix this, frankly, badly drawn geometry of the Sheffield City Hall. So in my Sheffield polygons layer, I've drawn it much nicer, and I've registered the old or the existing Arches geometry as a resource. Again, it's registered, it knows it's an Arches resource. I've now selected my new geometry, and instead of adding, I want to replace. So I go and say, yes, I want to replace, click replace. It's identified that there's only one polygon that's been selected, and it tells me it was a success. And now I go back to Arches, and we can see that my old badly drawn geometry is now gone, and the nice new one is in its place. And now just before logging out and being done with the day, I want to have a look at the activity log just to be sure that I've definitely done what I was meant to. And we can see with timestamps that yes, I created a resource, I appended, and I replaced geometries. And with that, I can log out, I can be done, I can close the plugin. And yeah. So that's currently the functionality. There are a few things I didn't go into. Sort of it recognizes whether your model's got multiple geometry nodes. So if that is something that you've modeled, you can upload to one or the other, along with some other things. So we've got the Arches roadmap, which is also a GitHub repository, primarily for developers, but anyone can see it. And yeah, we've got up to version 3 planned, really, and this is probably going to grow as well. We had a few things that we really wanted to get into the 1.0 release, and we just had to tell ourselves, no, that has to wait for 1.1. Things like, instead of telling you one polygon to be sent to Arches, it's going to instead show you a nice image of what you've selected so that you can visually see that it's correct, rather than push it to Arches and realize you've made a mistake. Other things like integrating with Q settings a bit more. So if you want the default style sheet to be the QGIS one, then you can set that, and you don't ever have to you don't have to continuously be disabling it every time you open QGIS. Then version 2, the main one, well, the main two we've got there are um, supporting single sign-on with Arches. So currently you have to log in with your URL, username, and password in one go, which means that if you use SSO for Arches and maybe use Active Directory or something to manage logins, unfortunately the QGIS plugin won't work for you at the moment. Secondly, instead of having a separate interface that opens over the top of QGIS, we're going to have the interface docked to the QGIS panel, so you can drag it around. You can have it as an independent interface if you want, but you can also just attach it to the side so that it never goes away. And then finally, version 3 is to support QGIS 4 and the upgrade of PyQt from 5 to 6. And again, that's the UI framework. And then, as I mentioned, this is our README on GitHub and kind of the user documentation, and it's very thorough. We go into quite a lot of detail, things that I've spoken about today, but also if you want to revisit them and you want to read about them, then you can do here. It's got information for users, it's got information for developers. I would highly recommend it. And again, if you're still having issues, don't hesitate. Ask me via Slack or mention it on the forum or in the GitHub repository. Anyway is a good way. And yes, that's it. So that was the QGIS plugin. Thank you everyone for listening. If you've got questions, feel free. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sam. That was really interesting. It was a good update on what you're doing. Any questions from anybody? No questions. Oh, there is one. Sorry, yes.
Yes, so that it's a master project. Thanks, Samuel, for this. I wanted to ask if you can also do a batch upload from QGIS to Arches if you have more than one, like 20, 50 polygons or points.
As in sort of 20 polygons to go to 20
Yeah.
resources.
Yeah.
That's something that it can't do at the moment, but there is a GitHub issue and feature request already raised for it. It's in our plans. I don't think it was on that roadmap, but it probably should be. So yeah, that's something that we'd quite like to go in as well.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? I've got one. I think we have touched on this before. The ability to push data between Arches and QGIS. I mean, obviously, this is putting information onto Arches, but whether there be any possibility of if you've selected records in Arches, whether you could then view those selected records in QGIS. Is that something on your long-term plans?
Yeah, we had a look at we started thinking last year at the Belfast conference about maybe integrating with the GeoJSON endpoint so that if you didn't want to use spatial views, but you wanted to just grab a few resources here and there, maybe just one or two, or just a whole batch of them, then you could use the spatial views you could use the GeoJSON URL to load them into QGIS. There's not been as much progress on that, but it is definitely still on our radar. And I think all of these requests are super helpful to sort of drive where the product or where the project, should go, and what people would actually benefit from.
I think that for us for HERs would be something that would be very, very useful to have. Anybody else? No? Well, I'm sure both our speakers, I'd like to thank them for presenting today. And I'm sure if you have any questions that come to you after the meeting, they'd be more than happy to answer your questions. I'd just like to say, is anybody got anything that they want to briefly mention or discuss? We've got a few minutes left, or thoughts for future meetings. And say, if you would like to present, please do think about it and let myself or Mike or Jana know whether it's for our May meeting or a later meeting. That might be something you're working on, or it could be something that you've got a question about, or something you just want to just generally discuss amongst the group. Please do let us know. Well, if there's nothing else, I'd just like to again thank our speakers for taking the time to present to us, and thank you all for coming along. And we'll see you at the next meeting. Take care, everybody.
Thanks all. Thanks, Stuart.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Right.